me show you what we're going to do here in a minute. Some of you are going to go, oh, wow, what on earth? Okay, this is, I wrote out 2 Thessalonians 2 from 3b to the end of 2:7, and it's all morphologically tagged. So see if the camera can get a picture of that. Okay, so that's the text. That's the body of the text that I treated. It's all completely morphologically tagged. So I have to try and include everybody here, so forgive me. Tagging, no. It basically, we're identifying what those words are. So I'm looking at a lady in front of me, and I know she's a lady, so she's definitely, when I say she's a lady, that's a noun, and I know it's a feminine noun, and depending on what this lady is doing may change other things around, but we established that now if the lady is in front of me answering a phone, then she's doing an activity, and we begin to formulate sentences, and inside there we can even parse or take apart or tag a sentence. So because the New Testament, written in Greek, not English, and Greek is a completely different language using a case system, when we tag the words in the Greek, we're not just tagging nouns, we're tagging verbs, adjectives, everything gets tagged. We identify it. That helps to confirm whether or not something has been closely translated or understood. Now here's where the difficulty comes. We saw this, in fact, in our Hebrew class, so I'll take a real-life example. In the first or second group, and this goes back well over a year or two now, I had them translate Psalm 84. And maybe there are a couple of people here in this room that did it. You did it. Were you surprised that the things you translated were actually not kind of even close to what was in the book?
Yes, ma'am.
This is what happens. And then we have the dilemma of, why did the translators decide to do that instead of that? So now we start understanding a little bit of the complexity of taking something from one language, which has its own way of conveying meanings, into, forgive me, a lesser language, English. Now, it can't be any lesser, by the way, than Hebrew, because Hebrew's got a limited vocabulary, but it's like trying to say, how do you make something even? So there's always this dilemma. So even if we sat down 30, I think at the time there were 45 people in that particular class that translated a psalm. And some of the people were excellent students. I'm not going to lie to you, a couple of them were like, wow, blew me away. And even those people who used a lexicon, who had understanding, who understood the Semitic flow, still came up with different words, different meanings, which changed the body of what was being conveyed. So it's one thing to morphologically tag something. It's a second thing to bring it into the English now and try to say we're taking something from the Greek and we're going to bring it into the English to try and understand how it works. Part of that problem is in our text. Let's go first to the King James. Let's take a look. We're in 2 Thessalonians right now. And I began my, what I just did, the morphological tagging, I began at 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3, and I called it B, because I started at, except there come the falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, just reading straight King James, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And this is, I told you, this verse here is so, what do you do with this? Because Paul's saying, don't you remember when I was with you, I told you these things? Well, obviously, we don't have these things that Paul said. It's a conversation that occurred. The letter was written to correct certain other issues. So we don't know exactly verbatim what he said. But he's saying to them, don't you remember what I told you when I was with you? And now you know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time? For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. Let me keep reading for just a second. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. We could go on and on. So I want you to take a look first at, we started down this path last week, the two words in the King James. One of them is in verse 6, withholdeth, and the second one is letteth. And if you have a Bible like mine, by the way, you're going to see that the Strong's number is the same, 2722, for both those words, because they're identical. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the words that are in blue. I want you to pay close attention to something. Even if you say, oh, well, that's all Greek, I don't understand anything that's there. Oh, that's fine. You don't really need to at this point. But what I want you to see, we'll do the inverted pencil technique. So I'm not sure which way. I want you to look carefully here. So let me see if I can just tilt this way just a little bit. Do you see NS? NS. And down here you see MS. This is highly problematic because we have the same word, it's a participle, but it's occurring one time as a neutral. So Greek has feminine, masculine, I'm pointing at the cameraman, and then there's neutral, neuter, neutral. That's a whatchamacallit. Okay? It's genderless. So examples of words that are genderless. Pneuma, as in pneuma hagion, the Holy Spirit, genderless. And there's very good reason. I love the way God made everything mesh together perfectly this way. If the Holy Spirit was known or understood as a man, then a man's spirit could not inhabit the body of a woman. So it's neutral, neuter. There are other nouns in Greek that are neutral or neuter, such as the word euangelion, the gospel. That's neutral. Onoma, the name, referring to onomotheo, the name of God, the name, neutral. Let's see what else we have that's neutral. There's a couple. Thelema, as in that means the will of God, that's neutral. So we have words that are neutral. The problem here is that this word that is occurring in the neutral and singular is a participle. That means it's not a noun. It means that it's something that is going to be performing an act or an activity. And this makes this quite complex. So I don't want to bog down on lots of grammar. Believe me, we're going to talk about this again and again and again, even though I told you there's no outcome, not for my perspective, nor for Dr. Scott's. Neither one of them will have any ground, quite frankly. When I show you what's going on, you'll understand why I'm saying this. But what we have is in the translation. So you can see the first thing that's glaring is that the King James translators use two different words for the same word. And that same word is occurring in our text. We'll call it for right now withholdeth, is occurring in our text one time as a neutral participle that's active, that's doing something, and then just a verse later occurring as a masculine singular. Now, indulge me for a minute. And now you know emphasis. What? What? You get it? It. What? Although I don't want to refer to it that way. What withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time? For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he. So we went from a what. It's there in our English. It's just not as visible when you look at it in the Greek, and it's like a neon sign. So the first thing we need to understand, or try to understand, is, excuse me, I'm just going to say it, what the hell is this word? And why is there not some, how come there is no flow of keeping the word on the same plane? So before I can even deal with the grammar, let's talk about this word. What does this word mean? Withholdeth and letteth. What does it mean? So for that, and as I said, you have to forgive me because this is not something that you can do in pablum form. This requires some thinking people here, and I really believe the Lord gave me the mind to be analytical, dig and probe, and yet have a very spiritual heart and spiritual eyes. But I'm not going to lie to you. This is like levels of work that are involved. So hold your brain, and let's see what this word looks like. So let's talk about this word. The Greek word that you are seeing in the blue box, kateko. And I'm going to switch around here to my tablet. Let's go do this here. So we got kat. I'll write it out exactly like this first. Okay. So when I looked up this word at first glance in the 7th edition, I'm giving you all my sources so you can go and check it out for yourself. When I looked up this word in the 7th edition of Liddell and Scott's Greek English Lexicon on page 421, I was immediately taken with something. That this word, which for the most part is being translated to hold fast or such translations, actually appears in the lexicon like this. And the reason it appears like this, because they are showing you that this is actually a compound. And the compound is from kata and this word over here, eco, whatever this word is, which eventually will turn into, for our studying purposes, first it will be something like ekine. Maybe this, I don't know, I don't have it in front of me, so I may have made a mistake there, but we'll see. So we have two words we have to deal with. So under the heading of kateko, and you're going to see why it perplexed me. Why do you need a compound if the root does something else? So kateko, first, to hold fast, to hold back, to restrain, to control, to bridle. When it is in the passive form, for which our use is not, to be held down, to be bound, to be kept under, to detain, to have in possession, to possess, to occupy, of sound, to fill, or to continue. Now, when I read that, there's something that gripped me, not just the fact that I was dealing with a compound, but that I said, something is not quite gelling with me. I got to see what this word eco comes up with. So if you have a Liddell and Scott, on page 341, A is always the first column, A and B. Transitive, to have or to hold, to possess, to have charge of, to dwell in, inhabit, haunt, to know, to understand. To hold, to keep close, to hold in guard, to keep safe. As the intransitive, to hold oneself, which I would also say would be reflexive. To keep, to be engaged, to lead towards, to hold, to cling, or to cleave. So don't think this is exhaustive, but it is exhausting. Don't think that's exhaustive. But let's talk about kata for a minute, and then we'll come back to this. Kata as a preposition used with genitive or accusative. We'll do the grammar box in a minute for those people who have no clue of what I'm talking about. But when the word kata is used with the genitive, it denotes a motion from above moving down, down into, in respect of, bestowed upon. With the accusative, motion downwards according to, in relation to. Kata is also used often to strengthen the notion of a word. To quote Dr. Scott, he said, sometimes kata is an intensifier. His great example was katakrima, ultimate judgment, where Romans 8 says, there is now, therefore, no ultimate condemnation. That's condemnation and to strengthen or intensify kata. So we have something immediately while I'm looking at the word for echo says to have or to hold, to possess. Well, how do you intensify? And this is why you'll read sometimes the word will be translated as hold fast, which again is another kind of old English sound to it. But if echo on its own is to have or to hold, to possess, how do you intensify having or holding or possessing? Now, we might do, so bizarre that I would go to the Hebrew, which is less specific than the Greek, but we might do something like what the Hebrew does when it puts a verb into the PL and makes it intensive. It's an intensifier. It makes it so instead of the glass was broken, the glass shattered. We might do that. The problem is with this word, how do you make, for example, how do you intensify possession? Please don't try and answer that, because you could say, well, I could cling or cleave to something, but how do you intensify that more? Because that was one of the definitions of echo, to hold, to cleave, or to cling. So how do you intensify that more? Now, one of the other dictionaries even used this concept in the realm of marriage, to marry something, to where two things become one and they're joined together, which basically in the realm of possession might intensify. If you keep going into the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, we have echo and ikain will be there as well. They're same words. Old Indo-Germanic with the sense of hold fast, lay hold of, or to get into one's power. So my question is, and this is where my brain went, how could kata intensify what the Theological Dictionary is defining echo as already to hold fast? Do you understand? It's kind of like, So there had to be something more to this word. So as I began to probe, I had to get, it's kind of like putting color on something or putting flesh and blood. You've got to have some understanding. So I combined a bunch of things to get an idea of what this word, before putting kata or other prefixes such as ante, ape, ene, or mete, or met, before putting any prefix on it, what this word might entail. So I tried to transistorize this to make it as succinct as possible to not bore you. First, possession spiritually. So we might use this word echo in the spiritual realm, as in to have life within oneself, to be alive, to possess the power of thought, to possess or have understanding. Now, in Revelation 13:18, it says, let him that hath understanding, him who possesses understanding. Now, these are shades of things which become important to the understanding of this word. Also, one may bear qualities or spiritual gifts or powers. So in terms of possession, I want you to think of the realm of possession. This same word, used in the middle voice, could be used to attach oneself, to cling. In the New Testament, having, as in, this is a very awkward way to say this, possessing salvation. Like those who are in Christ, who then are, they are his and therefore possess salvation. It's a gray area. 1 Corinthians 2:16 says, we have the mind of Christ. Having as in possessing, but obviously it is the realm of understanding. When we say we have the mind of Christ, we possess the understanding there's these shades here going on. I don't know if you see the nuances of them, but they're there. Ikain, when we talk about having or possessing, is also used in terms of demonic possession. So it's important that when it's being used in that realm, it is not understood as to have in one's power or to possess with regard to demonic possession, but rather to be born or to bear in oneself. In other words, to be possessed may not represent that which a person says, I own. They may not even be cognizant of the fact that they are possessed. Does that make sense to you? It's kind of one of these deep things you have to follow. We're just trying to do this to get some sense of the word. All right, if we put ante, like I was defining the Antichrist. If we put ante on eco, we get to hold against. If this anteco was in the middle voice, it would be to hold protectively for oneself. And then we may say, even though it's to hold against, we may also say to cleave. It's a very strange way of understanding this. If we put ape on eco, we have to hold off, to keep off, or to be distant. If we put ene, that's en, eco, we have to hold fast to something, subject to, or to let oneself be entangled with. Meteko, which is simply putting met, which is from meta, with, but it's shortened down to met because of the e. Meteko, to have a share in. So kateko, how will we understand what this means? Should we take kateko to mean the understanding of kata downwards, or should we understand it as an intensifier on eco, so that something that is possessed, something that is held, something that is occupied is done in an intense way? So we're going to get to that. First, we're going to take a break. I need you to get on the telephone.